The first crack of the rifle sounded like the world splitting in two. It wasn't a hunter's shot. It was sharp, angry, a man-killer shot. It ripped through the cold Colorado air and slammed into the granite walls of the mountain, echoing back as a promise of violence. Another shot followed, closer this time, then a third, so close Evelyn Carter could feel the vibration in her teeth. She flattened herself against the rough bark of a pine tree, her breath ghosting in the thin air. At 26, she'd learned the hard way that trouble in these mountains had a sound all its own. And this sound was a symphony of death. The Timberline was 100 yards above her, a stark border between the dark sheltering forest and the harsh open tundra of the peaks. For 3 years, this forest had been her home, her pharmacy, her sanctuary. She knew every stream, every game trail, every patch of yarrow that grew in the high meadows. But today, the familiar woods felt like a cage, its bars made of shadow and pine. "Come on out, woman." The voice was a gravelly roar, a man used to shouting over the wind. "We know you're up there. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Evelyn's fingers brushed the worn leather of her medicine bag, a silent, desperate prayer. The morning had started so peacefully. She'd been gathering herbs by a spring, the October chill a familiar companion. Now, 5 armed men were moving through the trees below her, fanning out in a practiced, deliberate line. They moved like wolves, patient and sure of their prey. Bounty hunters, she guessed by the hard look of them. Men with dead eyes and scarred hands who made their living from the misery of others. But what bounty could she possibly be worth? The leader, a giant of a man with a beard the color of dirty snow, wore something around his neck that made her stomach heave. Even from this distance, she knew what those small, dark, dangling objects were. Trophies, the kind taken from men who had lost a fight. The practice had become more common as the wars between settlers and tribes raged on, each new horror feeding the next in a gruesome, endless cycle of revenge. A twig snapped just to her left, way too close. Stealth was no longer an option. Evelyn broke from her cover, moving with a quiet speed born of years spent surviving in these mountains. Her boots, worn soft and supple, made almost no sound on the pine needle floor of the forest. She moved like a ghost, a skill taught to her by an old Ute woman who'd found her, fresh from Missouri and hollowed out by grief, and decided she was worth saving. That old woman had taught her which plants could heal a fever and which could stop a heart, how to read the clouds for a coming storm, and most importantly, how to vanish when men with guns came looking for you. The Timberline was still 100 yards away. 100 yards of hell. If she could reach it, the open ground of the tundra would be a risk, but it was a risk on her terms. These men were trackers, forest hunters. They'd be less comfortable on the exposed, windswept slopes above. But 100 yards felt like 100 miles with 5 rifles pointed at your back. "Ain't no use running," another voice called, this one younger, almost gleeful. "Garrison wants a word with you. Something about that Indian you've been tending to." So that was it. 3 weeks ago, she'd found a man near Beaver Creek, half dead and burning with fever. She hadn't asked his name or his tribe, though his face and his clothes marked him as Comanche, 1,000 miles from his home on the southern plains. She'd done what she always did. She'd cleaned his wounds, set his broken ribs, and fought the infection with willowbark tea and poultices. He'd stayed for 5 days, a silent, watchful presence in her small cabin. When he was strong enough to travel, he'd pressed a small, beaded pouch into her hand and disappeared into the pre-dawn mist. She should have known word would get out. In the small, isolated settlements of the high country, gossip traveled faster than a wildfire. A white woman playing doctor to an Indian, and a Comanche at that, was more than just a scandal. It was seen as a betrayal. But if this man, Garrison, thought she knew something more, something worth sending 5 killers into the mountains for, her foot dislodged a loose stone. It tumbled down the slope, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. "There, by the big pine," a voice shouted. She ran. She abandoned stealth for pure, desperate speed. The thin air at 10,000 feet was like fire in her lungs. Every breath was a ragged gasp. Behind her, she could hear the heavy crash of boots through the undergrowth, the sharp crack of branches. The men were calling out to each other. their voices carrying a chilling military precision. These weren't just some backwoods bounty hunters. They moved like soldiers. They moved like men who had hunted people before. The trees began to thin. The timber line was close. So was the end of her cover. It was an impossible choice. Stay in the woods and let them surround her, or break for the open ground and become the easiest target in the world. Her grandmother always used to say there was a third option, if you were smart enough to find it. But her grandmother had died in a warm bed in Missouri, not with a pack of wolves at her heels. A rifle cracked, the sound deafeningly close. Bark exploded from a tree just inches from her head, showering her face with sharp splinters. They were toying with her, shooting to scare, not to kill. Not yet, anyway. Next one won't miss, the leader's voice boomed. He was closer now, much closer. Stop running and come down peaceful like. Nobody has to get hurt. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Men like this didn't track a lone woman through the wilderness just to ask a few polite questions. She'd seen what happened to people who went peaceful like. And if she was lucky, she'd end up in a cage. If she wasn't, she didn't want to think about that. She broke through the last line of trees, spilling out onto the windswept tundra. The world opened up, vast and beautiful and terrifying. Patches of early snow clung to the rocks, and the sky was a shade of blue so deep it hurt to look at. The wind up here was relentless, a physical force that tore at her clothes and stole the breath from her lungs. But she could see them now, all 5 of them, emerging from the forest below. They spread out in a deliberate, tightening crescent, cutting off any hope of escape. The leader, the one with the necklace of human trophies, raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel with a lazy, practiced ease. Last chance, Miss Carter. So they knew her name. This was no random encounter. This was personal. Garrison's a reasonable man, the leader continued, his voice slick with false sincerity. He just wants to know about the Indian, where he went, what he told you. You help us, we'll help you. Nobody has to die on this mountain today. Evelyn stood straight, the wind whipping strands of auburn hair across her face. For 3 years, she'd been the angel of the Timberline. That's what they called her in the mining camps and the lonely homesteads. She was the woman who would come in the dead of night, through a blizzard or a thunderstorm, to set a broken bone, deliver a baby, or sit with a dying man. She treated anyone, miners, cowboys, natives, outlaws. Pain was pain. It didn't have a color. It didn't have a creed. She was an anomaly in this brutal, unforgiving land, tolerated by some, hated by others, but truly understood by no one. I don't know any Garrison, she called back, her voice surprisingly steady against the wind. And I've treated too many wounded men to remember every single one. You've wasted your time. The leader spat a stream of brown tobacco juice onto the ground. Now that's disappointing, Miss Carter. Real disappointing. Boys, it looks like the lady needs a little encouragement. They started toward her, their steps slow and menacing. She backed away, her boots finding purchase on the rocky ground. Her mind was a whirlwind of desperate calculations. The tundra stretched for miles behind her, but without food or shelter, the freezing night would be a death sentence. Below her, the forest that had once been her refuge was now a den of wolves. Her hand found the small surgeon's knife at her belt, a blade meant for healing, not for harming. But she'd learned a long time ago that in the Colorado Territory, the line between the two could get awfully blurry. As the 5 men closed in, their faces grim with purpose, Evelyn Carter knew her time as the free-willed healer of the high country was about to come to a very violent end. Unless she could find that third option her grandmother was always talking about. The thing was, she was starting to think the third option was nothing more than a ghost story. The men were just 20 yards away when the memory hit her, sudden and sharp as a flash flood. It wasn't these men, not this mountain. It was Missouri 13 years ago. She was a girl hiding in the root cellar, listening to the fever take her family one by one. The cholera had swept through their town like a phantom army, and her father, the town's only doctor, could do nothing but watch, helpless, as the people he loved burned up from the inside. It's a strange thing, the way your mind wanders when death is walking toward you. Evelyn pressed her back against a cold slab of granite, feeling the ancient indifference of the mountain through the thin wool of her dress. The hunters had stopped again, sensing the cornered desperation in her posture. The leader, the one with the winter ice eyes, gestured for his men to spread out even wider. "No need for this to get ugly, Miss Carter," he called out, his voice dripping with that false reasonableness men use when they think they hold all the cards. "You're a healer, not a fighter. Just come quiet." But Evelyn was already fighting. She was fighting memories as sharp as broken glass. After the fever took her parents, she'd gone to live with her grandmother, a woman who knew the old ways of healing: herbs, poultices, tinctures, and teas. But her grandmother had taught her more than just medicine. "Sometimes, child," the old woman had told her, her hands grinding willow bark in a stone mortar, "the world won't let a woman just be. They'll try to fence you in. But healing knows no fences. Pain speaks the same language in every throat." Those words had pushed Evelyn west to the territories, a place she imagined was vast enough for a woman to carve out her own existence. She'd been naive. The first year had almost broken her. In Denver, the male doctors had treated her like a joke. One of them, a man named Marcus Thornton, had laughed in her face. "Medicine is no place for the gentler sex," he'd slurred, his breath thick with whiskey. "Perhaps you could find work as a nurse." So she'd left the city, turning her back on its rules and its fences. She'd headed for the mountains with a pack mule, her grandmother's medicine bag, and a rifle she barely knew how to use. The mining camps had become her proving ground. In those rough, dirty places, a broken leg or a raging fever didn't care about the gender of the hands that treated it. Word spread. Where the official doctors charged a pouch of gold dust, Evelyn asked only for what people could spare. 15 yards now, boys," the leader's voice sliced through her thoughts. "Nice and easy. Watch her hands." Her hands. She looked down at them. They were calloused and stained with plant dyes, but they were steady. These hands had pulled bullets from flesh, set bones, and caught newborn babies. But they'd also crossed lines. A few years back, she treated an elderly Ute man left for dead by the cavalry. The miners who found him had brought him to her as a curiosity. She'd treated him like any other patient. He'd survived, and before he left, he'd taught her things about mountain plants she'd never known. Word of that had spread too. In the settlements, they started calling her an Indian sympathizer. A white woman learning their medicine? That was dangerous. Treasonous even. "You've got quite a reputation," the leader said. He was closer now, close enough for her to see the tobacco stains on his teeth. "The angel who don't discriminate. Some might call that noble. Others might call it a crime." "Healing has no politics," Evelyn replied, her voice eerily calm. "Maybe so," another hunter chimed in, a younger one with nervous, darting eyes. "But harboring enemies of the state? That's a different story." Enemies of the state. Was that what the wounded Comanche had been? He had spoken very little during his recovery, but she had seen a grief in his eyes that went beyond his physical wounds. A grief that came from losing everything. She hadn't asked him about it. Her grandmother had taught her that too. Some wounds you don't probe. They were just 10 yards away now. The hunters moved with the slow, patient confidence of men who had cornered their prey. The knife at her belt was useless against 5 rifles. Surrender was unthinkable. She'd heard the stories of what happened to women accused of siding with the natives. The official punishments were bad enough. But the unofficial ones, the ones that happened in the dark, lawless corners of the territory, those were the stuff of nightmares. "I've done nothing but practice medicine," she said, lifting her chin. The leader actually smiled, a humorless stretching of his lips. "Fancy words for a mountain woman. But you see, Miss Carter, out here we got different oaths. Simpler ones. Like the oath to protect our homes from savages and from the people who help them." 5 yards. She could see the notches carved into their rifle stocks. She could smell the stale sweat in chewing tobacco. But she could also see something else. A slight tremor in the young one's hands. The way another one kept glancing nervously back at the tree line. The leader's constant need to talk, to posture. They were nervous. They knew a cornered animal was the most dangerous kind. "Last chance, Miss Carter," the leader said, raising his rifle. "Come willing or come bloodied. Makes no difference to our pay." Evelyn Carter, healer of the high country, stood at the edge of the world and made her choice. Her grandmother had been right. The world wouldn't let a woman just be, but that had never stopped her before. Her hand didn't go to her knife, it went to her medicine bag. "If you want me," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper that carried on the wind, "you'll have to take me." The hunters tensed, their fingers tightening on their triggers. The cold mountain wind picked up, carrying the scent of the coming snow. The next few seconds would decide everything. But just as the hunters started to move, a sound cut through the air. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a shout. It was something else entirely, something ancient and chilling, a war cry. It seemed to come from the rocks themselves, from the very sky, echoing off the granite peaks until it surrounded them. The hunters spun around, their rifles swinging wildly, their confident smirks vanishing, replaced by mass of pure shock. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it was him. On a rocky ridge 50 yards above them, a figure stood silhouetted against the bright morning sun. He was no longer the broken, bleeding man who had collapsed on her doorstep. He was a warrior. In his hands he held a rifle, and it was pointed directly at the leader of the hunters. It was the Comanche. "Nuna," his voice rang out, clear and cold as the mountain air. "The woman is under my protection. Leave now, or your bones will feed the ravens." The leader, Harlan Briggs, just stared for a second, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. Then he reacted. He lunged for Evelyn, grabbing her arm and yanking her in front of him, a human shield. The barrel of his revolver dug hard into her ribs. "Well, well," Briggs growled, his breath hot and sour in her ear. "Looks like we flushed out 2 birds with 1 stone." He started barking orders. "Jenkins, high ground. Morrison, swift, circle left through the pines. Talbot, you're with me. That savage shows his face again. You put him down for good." The men scattered, their movements crisp and professional. These weren't just bounty hunters. They were ex-cavalry, soldiers who had traded their blue uniforms for blood money but had kept all the deadly training. "Your red friend made a big mistake coming back," Briggs hissed, his grip tightening on her arm. "He's going to die on this mountain, and you're going to watch." But Evelyn was barely listening. Hope, fragile and fierce, was kindling in her chest. Nuna had come back. He'd come back for her. He was outnumbered 5-1, and she knew his wounds weren't fully healed. He was in no condition for a fight like this. It was a suicide mission. But he had come back anyway. A shot rang out from the high ground, Jenkins firing at a flicker of movement among the rocks. The bullet sparked off granite with a high-pitched whine. Then another shot. Then silence. Jenkins had lost his target. "Slippery bastard," Briggs muttered. He raised his voice, shouting at the rocks. "Comanche, we got your woman. You want her to stay breathing, you show yourself." It was a bluff, and they both knew it. Nuna was too smart to fall for it. But what could he do? He was one man against 5 professionals. Suddenly there was a movement in the trees to their left. It was Morrison, stumbling out of the pines. But something was horribly wrong. His rifle was gone. Both of his hands were pressed to his throat, and dark blood was seeping through his fingers. He took 3 shaky steps into the open, and then collapsed onto the snow, a gurgling sound escaping his lips. "Morrison!" The hunter named Swift broke cover, running to his fallen partner. It was a fatal mistake. Evelyn saw it happen, a blur of motion from the shadows. She didn't see Nuna, only the result. There was a sickening thud, and Swift went down hard, his rifle flying from his hands. "Damn it!" Briggs spun Evelyn around, trying to keep her body between himself and the unseen threat. "Jenkins, you got eyes on him?" Silence. No answer from the high ground. The only sound was the wind and the wet, choking gas of the dying man in the snow. "He's using Apache tactics," the young hunter, Talbot, said, his voice cracking with fear. "Striking and vanishing. We should fall back." Before he could finish, a rock, thrown with incredible force and accuracy, flew out of nowhere and caught him squarely on the temple. He dropped like a sack of grain. 3 down. Less than 2 minutes. And they hadn't even gotten a clear shot at their attacker. "Jenkins!" Briggs roared, his voice raw with panic. "Answer me, damn you!" The answer came, but it wasn't from Jenkins. Nuna appeared on a ledge just 20 yards away. He was holding a new rifle, Jenkins's rifle. The sun was at his back, turning him into a dark, avenging angel. "Let her go, Briggs," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Your fight is with me." So they knew each other. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. "You killed my men!" Briggs snarled, swinging his revolver toward the ledge. "Your men are alive," Nuna replied. "Morrison needs a doctor soon, but he'll live. If she treats him, that's more mercy than you showed my people." "Mercy?" Briggs laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Your kind don't know the meaning of the word. Where's my brother, Savage? Where's Charlie's body?" "Charlie?" Evelyn's mind raced. Garrison's men had said the Comanches she'd treated had killed 3 men near Trinidad, that he'd ambushed a supply wagon. "I don't know your brother," Nuna said. "Liar!" The gun in Briggs's hand was shaking now. "Trinidad, 2 weeks back, you and your war party butchered 3 good men. My brother Charlie was one of them. Don't you deny it." Nuna was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was as cold and sharp as an icicle. "2 weeks ago, I was 200 miles south of here, trying to trade for the release of women and children taken by Colorado volunteers. I haven't been near Trinidad in months." "Convenient story." "The raid on my village was led by a man named Captain Samuel Morrison," Nuna continued, and Evelyn glanced at the man bleeding out in the snow. Morrison, a relative? The tangled web of violence and vengeance in the territory seemed to touch everyone. "They took 32 of our people. I was trying to buy them back with horses when they decided to use me for target practice instead." "Garrison says different," Briggs said, but for the first time a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "He's got witnesses, evidence." "Garrison lies," Nuna stated simply. "Ask yourself, Briggs, why is he so desperate to have me dead? What does he gain by making you believe I killed your brother?" The question hung in the freezing air. Evelyn could feel the tension in Briggs's body, the first crack in his hardened certainty. Just then, Talbot, the young hunter, groaned and stirred on the ground. He pushed himself to his hands and knees, blood streaming from the gash on his head. He saw his fallen rifle just a few feet away and scrambled for it. The shot from Nuna was impossibly fast. The bullet didn't hit Talbot. It hit the rifle's wooden stock, shattering it and sending the weapon spinning away across the rocks. Talbot froze, his eyes wide with the sudden, terrifying understanding of just how outmatched they were. "Enough blood has been spilled," Nuna said. "Take your wounded and go. Tell Garrison he'll have to find another fool to do his dirty work." "Can't do that," Briggs mumbled, but all the fight had gone out of him. "He's paying too good. We come back empty-handed. We're finished in this territory." "Better than being finished permanently," Nuna observed dryly. The standoff was balanced on a knife's edge. Briggs was a scared man now, and a scared man is a dangerous man. One wrong move, and this would all end in a bloodbath. "There's another way," Evelyn said softly, her voice cutting through the tension. Both men's eyes snapped to her. "Morrison is dying. He has minutes, maybe less. Let me treat him. You can go back and tell Garrison you had to choose between chasing us and saving your own man's life. It's the truth. It gives you an honorable way out." "Shut your mouth," Briggs growled, but she could see the gears turning in his head. "Look at him," she pressed, nodding toward the fallen man. "The blood is arterial. He's bleeding out. Is Garrison's money worth watching your man die right here in the snow?" The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Morrison's breathing was a shallow, rattling whisper. Finally, Briggs made his choice. "Talbot," he yelled, "get to Morrison. Put pressure on that wound." He raised his voice, shouting at the ledge. "Comanche, we're backing off. But this ain't over. Garrison won't stop, and neither will we." "Time is all anyone has," Nuna replied. Briggs began to back away, dragging Evelyn with him. But after 10 yards, he suddenly stopped and spun her around, his face just inches from hers. "You're coming with us," he snarled. "Insurance." "No." Nuna's voice was a thunderclap. "She stays." "Or what?" Briggs sneered, his confidence returning. "You'll shoot? Risk hitting your precious angel?" He shoved her away from him, stumbling backward toward his men. "Get Morrison!" he screamed at Talbot. "We're leaving. Now!" The retreat was a chaotic scramble. Talbot and the groggy, half-conscious Swift struggled to carry Morrison down the mountain. Briggs covered them, his revolver still aimed in Nuna's direction. Only when they had disappeared into the trees did Evelyn's legs finally give out. She collapsed to the cold, hard ground, the world spinning around her. In an instant, Nuna was there, kneeling beside her, his hands gently checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She just shook her head, unable to speak. The delayed shock was hitting her now, a bone-deep tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. "They'll be back," she finally managed to say. "Yes," Nuna agreed, his dark eyes scanning the tree line below. "With more men. We can't stay here." "We," the word hung in the air between them. In the space of an hour, her entire life had changed. Her quiet, solitary existence was over. For better or for worse, her fate was now tied to this Comanche warrior who fought like a ghost and carried secrets that men were willing to kill for. "We need to move," he said, helping her to her feet. "I know places in these mountains they will never find." Evelyn looked at the trampled, blood-stained snow. Her old life had ended right here, at the Timberline. "My supplies," she said, thinking of her cabin, her medical journals, the life she had built. "My cabin." "There's no time," Nuna said gently. His hand found hers, his grip warm and steady. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. This is my fault. I never should have led them to your door." She turned to face him, this man who had come back from the dead to save her. "I'm not sorry," she said, and the truth of the words surprised her. "Whatever happens next, I am not sorry that I helped you." A flicker of something, gratitude, relief, something more, softened the hard lines of his face. "Then we go together," he said simply. The first flakes of a coming blizzard were beginning to fall. Behind them lay the ruins of her life. Ahead lay nothing but uncertainty and danger. But as Nuna led her higher into the mountains, his hand holding hers, Evelyn Carter felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She wasn't alone. It was terrifying, and it was exhilarating. The hunt wasn't over. The stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't facing the storm by herself. And in the harsh math of survival, sometimes that was enough. They climbed for 2 hours, the wind rising to a furious howl as the blizzard descended upon the mountain. The snow wasn't gentle. It was hard and sharp, driven by a gale that stung any exposed skin. The world disappeared into a churning vortex of white. "We need shelter now!" Nuna shouted over the roar of the wind. The temperature had plummeted. Dressed only in her light wool dress, Evelyn was already shivering violently. The cold was a physical pain, seeping deep into her bones. Nuna pointed toward a dark slash in the rock face ahead. "A cave system. I've used it before." He half carried her the last 50 yards, his body a shield against the worst of the wind. She stumbled into the cave's entrance, collapsing just inside as the world went quiet. The sudden absence of the wind was a shock to her system. Her body, finally recognizing how cold it had become, was racked with violent shivers. Working quickly, Nuna pulled dry tinder and wood from a hidden cache inside the cave and coaxed a small fire to life. The flickering flames pushed back the oppressive darkness, revealing ancient drawings on the cave walls. The ghosts of others who had sought shelter here long ago. "This storm is a bad one," he said, his face grim in the firelight. "We could be trapped here for days." Days! The thought was terrifying. They had no food and her medical supplies were all but gone. "Your wounds," she said through chattering teeth, the healer in her overriding her own misery. "You fought too hard. You've reopened them. Let me see." "Later," he said firmly. He pulled a rolled-up blanket, another item from his hidden stash, and held it out to her. "Get out of those wet clothes before you freeze to death. The mountain doesn't care about modesty." He helped her with the buttons, his touch impersonal and efficient. Soon she was wrapped in the warm, dry blanket, her own clothes steaming by the fire. He had shed his own soaked outer shirt, and in the flickering light, she could see the angry red lines of the scars she had treated. He was favoring his left side, and she saw him wince as he moved. "Now," she insisted, "let me look." He finally relented. The external wounds had closed, but the tissue underneath was swollen and inflamed. The kind of exertion he'd just gone through could have easily killed him. You shouldn't have come back, she whispered, applying the last of her healing salve to the worst of the scars. Leaving you to those men, he said, his voice low and matter-of-fact, would have killed me in a different way. The wind howled outside, a mournful, lonely sound. The fire crackled, a tiny beacon of warmth in a vast frozen world. It felt like they were the only two people left alive. Tell me about Trinidad, she said, needing to understand, needing to fill the silence. Briggs said you killed his brother. Nuna stared into the flames for a long time before he spoke. There was a raid on a supply wagon, he said, his voice heavy. 3 men died, but it wasn't me, and it wasn't 2 weeks ago. It was in the summer. It was my cousin and his friends. Young men full of rage and looking for revenge. Revenge for what? He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a pain that was older and deeper than any physical wound. For the attack on our village, the one I told you about, the one led by Captain Morrison, the one where they took our women and children. He didn't have to say what happened to them. Everyone knew. So Garrison is using an old crime to frame you, she said, the pieces clicking into place. Garrison wants me dead for other reasons, Nuna corrected her. The Trinidad raid is just a convenient excuse. It gives men like Briggs a righteous cause. It makes the hunt legal. What other reasons? He took a deep breath. For the last year, I have been working with a man named Agent Matthews, a federal agent. We were trying to negotiate a lasting peace, a treaty between the tribes and the settlers. Suddenly, it all made a terrible kind of sense. A Comanche warrior who could read and write English, who could negotiate treaties, who worked for peace. That man was a far greater threat to men like Garrison than 100 raiding parties. War was profitable. It opened up land for settlement. It justified military budgets. It sold newspapers. Peace was bad for business. Garrison must have found out, Evelyn breathed. I was supposed to meet Agent Matthews at Fort Garland, Nuna said, his voice laced with bitterness. I never made it. The volunteers attacked my camp just a day before. Someone told them exactly where to find me. Someone betrayed me. Outside, the blizzard raged, piling snow against the mouth of the cave, sealing them in. Why did you really come back for me? She asked softly. You could have run, tried to get back to your people. He looked away from the fire, his gaze meeting hers. My people are scattered to the winds, and I owed you a debt. He paused, and a flicker of something vulnerable crossed his face. When I left your cabin, I didn't go far. I watched from the trees. I told myself it was to make sure Briggs's men didn't find you. But I think I was looking for a reason to stay. He let out a short, bitter laugh. In 5 days, you showed me more kindness than I have seen in 5 years. You made me remember what it felt like to be a man, not just a target. You made me remember hope. His honesty was a physical blow, a sudden, aching warmth in her chest. What happens when the storm passes? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Garrison won't stop, he said. The bounty on my head is just the beginning. Now that you're with me, you're a target too. We can't go back to the settlements. We'd have to go south, deep into the New Mexico territory, or deeper into these mountains where winter is the only law. He shifted, wincing as a fresh wave of pain shot through him. But I need to tell you something about Briggs. When he had me, when he was using me as a shield, he was afraid, not just of you. He kept glancing at the tree line like he was expecting someone else to show up. Nuna's eyes narrowed. You think he wasn't alone? I think Garrison has more men in these mountains than just that one hunting party, she said slowly. And I think this is much bigger than just you or some fabricated raid. This is about the land, about the future of this whole territory. Garrison isn't just a greedy man. He's a powerful one, and he's planning something. A sudden gust of wind screamed past the mouth of the cave, sounding like a lost soul. The fire dipped, and for a moment, the darkness seemed to press in on them. When this storm breaks, Nuna said, his voice resolute, we go south. I know people there. Hidden valleys where Garrison's reach doesn't extend. You can heal. I can heal. And then we decide. We decide if we keep running or if we turn around and fight. He looked at her, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You look like a warrior, Evelyn Carter." "Maybe that's what this world does to healers," she replied, managing a small smile of her own. He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His fingers were warm and strong, interlacing with hers. In the flickering firelight, with a blizzard trying to tear the world apart outside, two people who should have been enemies found a quiet, unspoken understanding. They were both outsiders, both survivors, both trying to navigate a world that had no place for them. Tomorrow would bring its own dangers, but for tonight, they had a fire, they had shelter, and they had each other. And in the heart of the storm, that felt like everything. On the third day, the world was born anew. They emerged from the cave into a landscape of blinding white, the sun glittering on a fresh blanket of deep snow. It was beautiful, and it was deadly. "The snow covers our tracks," Nuna said, his eyes scanning the pristine wilderness. "But it also makes it easier to spot theirs. They'll be watching the passes." During their days trapped in the cave, he had taught her. He'd shown her how to fashion snowshoes from pine boughs. He taught her how to read the subtle language of the wilderness, the signs that even a deep snow couldn't completely hide. He had shared his knowledge, and she, in turn, had tended to his wounds. Her medical skills, a different but equally vital form of survival. They were a team now, their skills intertwined. They moved in silence, a rhythm of cautious advance, pause, listen, advance again. The thin, cold air burned in their lungs. By early afternoon, Nuna froze, his hands shooting up in a signal for silence. Evelyn stopped instantly, her heart slamming against her ribs. He pointed down into a grove of aspens. At first she saw nothing, then a flicker, the glint of sunlight on something metal. They'd been found. "Back," Nuna breathed, but it was too late. "Hold it right there." The voice echoed across the snow-covered valley. It was Briggs. He stepped out from behind the aspens, his rifle leveled at them. But he wasn't alone. 4 other men materialized from the trees, fresh hunters, their faces hard and hungry. "Figured you'd have to come down sometime," Briggs called out, a triumphant sneer on his face. "This storm was a blessing. Gave us plenty of time to bring in reinforcements and set a proper trap." They were trapped. Open ground all around them. The hunters held the high ground with perfect firing lines. There was nowhere to run. "Miss Carter," Briggs said, that false friendliness back in his voice, "you've led us a merry chase. Come down quiet, and we might even let your savage friend die quick." "Garrison wants us alive," Evelyn said, stalling, her mind racing for an escape that didn't exist. "Garrison wants him alive," Briggs corrected her, gesturing with his rifle toward Nuna. "He's less particular about you. Said you know enough to be a problem." "Then why are we wasting time talking?" One of the new hunters, a lean man with eyes like a snake, grumbled. "Let's just shoot the Indian and take the woman." "Because, Henley," Briggs snapped, "I want to hear what he has to say." Briggs was nervous. Evelyn could see it. Despite his reinforcements, despite having them trapped, he was still afraid of Nuna. "Tell me something, Briggs," Nuna said, his voice calm and steady. "How much is Garrison paying you to avenge a murder I didn't commit?" "Shut your mouth about my brother." Briggs's rifle wavered slightly. "I didn't kill him, and you know it," Nuna pressed, taking a single, deliberate step forward. "You've had 3 days to think about it. 3 days to realize the dates and the distances don't add up. So ask yourself again, who really profits from you believing I did?" "He's trying to trick you," Henley snarled. "Garrison warned us he had a silver tongue." "Garrison knew your brother," Nuna continued, his voice cutting through the tension. "He knew his roots. He knew his schedule. It's almost like he knew what was going to happen to that supply wagon before it even happened." He took another slow step. "Asked to see the manifest from that wagon, Briggs. It wasn't carrying supplies. It was carrying gold. Payroll for the new fort. Gold that went missing after the raid. Gold that I'd bet my life ended up in Garrison's pockets." The seed of doubt Nuna had planted on the mountain began to sprout. Briggs's face was a mask of confusion and fury. "Enough!" he roared, steadying his rifle. "Take them!" In that split second, everything happened at once. Nuna shoved Evelyn hard, sending her flying into a deep snowdrift as he dove in the opposite direction. A volley of gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the air where they had been standing just a moment before. Evelyn came up sputtering, scrambling for cover. One of the new hunters, young and eager, appeared in front of her, raising his rifle. She didn't hesitate. She drove her knee hard into his groin and followed with an elbow to his throat. He went down gasping. She snatched his knife from his belt and kept moving, zigzagging between the trees just as Nuna had taught her. Behind her, the forest was chaos. Shouts, curses, and scattered gunfire. Nuna was a ghost, a phantom in the trees, using hit-and-run tactics to turn the hunters' numbers against them. "Get the woman!" Briggs's voice roared, filled with rage and frustration. Evelyn broke through the trees onto a steep, rocky slope. It was a mistake. There was no cover. Pain exploded in her left shoulder. She cried out as the impact spun her around. The world became a dizzying kaleidoscope of white snow and blue sky as she tumbled down the scree-covered slope. She landed hard at the bottom, dazed and bleeding. Footsteps crunched in the snow above her. It was Henley, the snake-eyed hunter. He grinned, leveling his rifle at her chest. "You move, you die." The blood was spreading fast, a hot, dark stain on the snow. Through and through, her mind cataloged clinically. High on the shoulder, not fatal. If it was treated, a very big if. "Leave her!" Nuna's voice cracked like a whip. He was on a ridge 50 feet away, holding a rifle he must have taken from one of the hunters. "Your fight is with me." "My fight is with whoever I'm paid to fight," Henley sneered, but his attention shifted to the more immediate threat. It was the only chance she'd get. Her good hand closed around a rock the size of her fist. When Henley glanced back at her, a fatal moment of hesitation, she threw it with all her might. The rock caught him square in the face. He staggered back, his rifle discharging wildly into the air. Nuna moved like a striking hawk. He covered the distance in a blur, and the butt of his rifle connected with Henley's jaw with a sickening crack. The hunter crumpled to the ground. "Can you move?" Nuna was at her side, his hands already assessing the wound. "I think so," she gasped, the world tilting precariously. The other hunters were regrouping above them, advancing down the slope. They were exposed, wounded, with nowhere left to run. Nuna looked at her bleeding shoulder, at the advancing men, and then at the dark chasm that yawned just to their left. A deep ravine, its bottom choked with snow. "Listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "The ravine. You jump. The snow might be deep enough to break your fall. It's a chance. It's the only chance we have." "Jump?" she croaked. "Are you insane? What about you?" "I'll hold them off. Buy you time." "No!" She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "We go together, or not at all." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate emotion. The hunters were getting closer. Bullets began to kick up snow around them. "Together, then," he said. He pulled her to her feet, his arm a steel band around her waist, supporting her. The edge of the ravine was just a few feet away. It was a 30-foot drop into the unknown. It was madness. "Now!" he yelled. They jumped. For a single terrifying moment, they were flying. The world fell away. The gunfire, the pain, the hunters, all of it vanished, replaced by the silent, rushing air. Evelyn had time for one clear thought. At least I'm not alone. Then they hit. The impact was brutal, but the snow was deep, deeper than they could have hoped. It swallowed them, cushioned them, saved them. She felt ribs crack, tasted blood in her mouth, but she was alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. Nuna dragged her from the crater they'd made. Above them, the hunters lined the edge of the ravine, shouting in frustration. The angle was too steep for a clean shot. They had bought themselves time. They stumbled deeper into the ravine, half carrying each other. A trail of Evelyn's blood marked their path in the pristine snow. They had to keep moving. To stop was to die. They climbed the far wall of the ravine, a torturous, agonizing ascent. Every handhold sent waves of fire through Evelyn's shoulder. Near the top, her strength finally gave out. Her hand slipped. She felt herself falling, but Nuna's hand shot out, grabbing hers, his grip like iron. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he hauled her over the edge. They collapsed in the snow, gasping for air, their bodies screaming in protest. The sun was setting, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of blood and gold. The hunters were still behind them, but they were alive, and they were free. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "For what?" "For jumping with me." He squeezed her hand. "I would follow you anywhere, Evelyn Carter." They stumbled on into the growing darkness, two wounded souls bound together by something far stronger than circumstance. They were bound by choice, by sacrifice, and by a love that was being forged in the crucible of fire and ice. The chase was far from over, but as they disappeared into the mountain's long shadows, they were no longer just running from death. They were running toward a life, together. That night was a blur of pain and fever. They found a shallow overhang, and Nuna built a small, smokeless fire. He patched her shoulder as best he could, following her whispered, pained instructions. Then she tended to his reopened wounds, their roles as healer and patient now completely intertwined. They were two halves of a whole, each keeping the other alive. "We need help," she said through gritted teeth, the infection in her shoulder already starting to rage. "A real shelter. A place to heal." "There is a place," Nuna said. "A trading post, 2 days south. Run by a man named Samuel Ortiz. He's neutral. He trades with everyone." "Can we trust him?" "We have to," he replied simply. The next day was a desperate, stumbling race against time. Evelyn's fever was climbing, and she knew she was slowing him down. By midday, they crested a ridge and saw them, a cavalry patrol blocking the valley ahead, and one of the soldiers was holding a piece of paper, a wanted poster. $5,000, Nuna breathed, reading the number from a distance only he could see. "Dead or alive. Garrison is pulling out all the stops." They were trapped between the hunters behind them and the army in front. "I'll give myself up," Evelyn rasped, her mind growing hazy. "I'll tell them you took me hostage. You can get away." "No." His voice was flat, final. "Before I found you, I was ready to die. You gave me a reason to fight. You gave me hope. We survive together or we fall together. That is my choice." Before she could argue, he was gone, melting into the trees. Minutes later, chaos erupted in the valley below. The cavalry's horses suddenly bolted, spooked by something unseen. As the soldiers scrambled to chase their mounts, Nuna reappeared. "A little bear scent goes a long way," he whispered with a grim smile. They slipped across the valley while the soldiers were distracted. They were almost to the other side when a single soldier who had stayed behind spotted them. He opened fire, the bullets kicking up snow around them. He was on horseback, closing fast. Nuna spun, raising his rifle, but he was exhausted, his hands shaking. "Together," Evelyn said, stepping beside him. She used her good arm to steady the long barrel of the rifle while he took aim. The cavalryman was almost on top of them, his saber drawn. "Now," she breathed. The rifle bucked against her good shoulder. The soldier tumbled from his horse. They didn't wait to see more, scrambling up into the rocks where a horse couldn't follow. Hours later, the fever finally won. Evelyn collapsed. The last thing she remembered was Nuna lifting her into his arms, his voice a constant, urgent murmur in her ear. "Stay with me, Evelyn. Not much further." She awoke to the smell of sage and wood smoke. She was in a real bed, a woven blanket pulled up to her chin. Sunlight streamed through a real glass window. Her fever was gone. "You're awake." Nuna was sitting in a chair beside the bed, the relief on his face so profound it was heartbreaking. "We made it. This is Ortiz's post. You've been unconscious for 2 days." The door opened and a weathered Mexican man entered, his eyes shrewd and watchful. This was Samuel Ortiz. "Señorita Carter," he said. "Your man here, he has been very worried." He nodded toward Nuna. "He has also made me a proposition. He says you are a great healer. My wife, she is with child and she is afraid. Her last baby, it did not live. If you will help her, my home is your home. You will have sanctuary." "Of course," Evelyn said without hesitation. After Ortiz left, Nuna told her the rest. Agent Matthews, their last hope for official help, was dead, murdered on the road to Fort Garland. Garrison was closing every door, tying up every loose end. They were well and truly alone. When you were sick, Nuna said, his voice quiet, I made a promise that if you lived, I would let you go. I would lead Garrison away, give you your life back. She stood, her legs still shaky, and crossed the room to him. And what if I don't want my old life back? She said, placing her good hand on his arm. What if this is my life now? He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw all the unspoken things that had passed between them on the mountain. Evelyn, he began, but he was cut off by a sudden shout from the courtyard. They rushed to the window. A dozen riders were approaching. At their head was Harlan Briggs, and beside him on a fine black horse was a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. Garrison, Nuna said, his voice a low growl. He's come himself. Ortiz met them in the main room, his face a grim mask. They are demanding I give you up. I told them you are under my protection. But Garrison, he does not respect the old ways. Let me talk to him, Evelyn said suddenly. No! Nuna grabbed her arm. He'll kill you. He wants something from us, she insisted. Something more than just our deaths. Let me find out what it is. Before he could stop her, she walked out into the sun-drenched courtyard. Garrison dismounted, his movements smooth and predatory. Miss Carter, he said, his voice like silk covering steel, you've caused me a great deal of trouble. You're the one spreading lies, she shot back. He smiled, a cold, empty thing. Truth is a matter of perspective. But you are right, I do want something from you. You see, there is a war coming. A final war to cleanse these territories and make them safe. And wars require justification, a spark to light the fire. The blood drained from her face as she understood. You need an incident. Precisely, he said. A beloved white healer, captured, tortured, and brutally murdered by a savage Comanche war chief. The story will write itself. The newspapers will demand blood. The government will have no choice but to give me the army I need to finish the job. But I'm not dead. A temporary inconvenience, he said with a dismissive wave. Or you could live, both of you. Sign a statement detailing the horrors of your captivity, and I will let you disappear. Mexico, perhaps. Everyone gets what they want. Except for the thousands of innocent people who will die in your war, she whispered, horrified. Progress, he shrugged, requires sacrifice. You have 1 hour to decide. He withdrew with his men, setting up a perimeter around the trading post. They were under siege. We can't trust him, Nuna said, pacing the room like a caged animal. He'd kill us anyway. I know, Evelyn said. She looked at Nuna, at this man who had become her world, and she knew what she had to do. Do you trust me? She asked. With my life, he answered without hesitation. Then listen carefully. An hour later, Evelyn walked back out into the courtyard, but she wasn't alone. At her side was Ortiz's pregnant wife, Maria. Behind them came Ortiz and his 2 young daughters. And behind them all walked Nuna, his hands empty and held out where everyone could see them. What is this, a parade? Garrison sneered. Witnesses, Evelyn said, her voice ringing out across the courtyard. You want a story, Mr. Garrison? I'll give you one, but it won't be yours. She raised her voice, making sure every one of Garrison's hired guns could hear her. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am a healer. I treated a wounded man, as my oath demands. This man, she gestured to Nuna, did not harm me. He saved my life. If you murder us today, you do it in front of this family. And their story, the true story, will spread to every mining camp and every settlement in these mountains. I have treated their children, their wives, their fathers. Who do you think they will believe? You, a man who profits from war, or the woman who saved their lives? She saw the flicker of doubt in the eyes of the hired men. They were killers, but murdering a woman known as an angel in front of a family, that was a different kind of business. And one more thing, she said, playing her final desperate card. I have written everything down. The truth about you, about Agent Matthews, about the Trinidad gold. A letter sent to a journalist in Denver. If I disappear, that letter gets published. Your entire enterprise comes crashing down. It was a complete lie, but Garrison didn't know that. His face was a thundercloud of pure fury. He had been outmaneuvered, beaten not by bullets but by words, by the reputation she had built, one patient at a time. "This isn't over," he snarled, wheeling his horse around. "You've chosen your side, Miss Carter. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." He and his men rode away, a cloud of dust and impotent rage. Evelyn's knees finally buckled. Nuna caught her, holding her tight. "That was the bravest, most insane thing I have ever seen," he murmured into her hair. "It worked," she whispered, leaning against him, finally safe. "For now." "For now," he agreed. "But he's right. This isn't over." "Then we'll be ready," she said, looking up at him. "Together." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and desperation, of hope and survival. It wasn't an ending, not by a long shot. Garrison would be back, and the war for the territory was far from over. But in a dusty courtyard at the edge of the world, two people who had been hunted and broken had found something unbreakable in each other. They had chosen love over fear and hope over hatred. It was a small rebellion against a world determined to tear them apart. But sometimes a small rebellion is all it takes to start a revolution. And this was only the beginning. If you enjoyed Evelyn and Nuna's story of survival and defiance, let me know in the comments below where you're listening from. It's incredible to see how these tales from the Wild West connect us all. And please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our journey through the untamed frontier.